From battling blazes to building life-saving tech, Andy Bozzo's journey is one of service, grit, and innovation. In this episode, the current fire captain and co-founder of Tablet Command shares how his passion for public safety led to creating a platform that's transforming incident command in firefighting and other arenas. We dive into the challenges of launching a tech startup in a tight-knit community, the lessons firefighting teaches about leadership and decision-making, and the future role AI could play in saving lives. If you ever wondered how technology and heroism interact, this is the story you don't want to miss. Enjoy. Andy, welcome to Peaking. How's it going?
It's going great, Wyatt. Thanks for having me on. I'm always happy to be on a podcast talking about Tablet Command and life in general as an entrepreneur and walking that fine line between a day job and not a startup anymore, a real company.
Yeah, awesome. I've seen you guys have certainly progressed over the last 15 years. You've been building
Yes.
Tablet Command. Such a journey, I imagine it's been. Excited to talk more about it. You and your co-founder both started in the firefighting world, one that I'm so interested in, but
Yeah.
my wife doesn't want me to do it. I said, honey, being in construction is 5 times more dangerous. It's 3 deaths per 100,000. It's not that dangerous. It's going to be fine. And I have a question specifically about firefighting because I'm in the corporate world. You're now somewhat in the corporate world. Seems like you're very much still a fire captain. When you're in the firefighting world, do you still have this existential angst that's like, what am I doing with my life? Or in the firefighting world, do you feel that I'm doing what's right?
Yeah, so I think I'm interpreting that question correctly. I was just in New York City a little while back for my niece's wedding, and the FDNY rolled down the street, and I turned to my wife and said, if I had 10 more lives, if I had 20 more lives, 19 of them would be firefighting in some different context, whether it's the FDNY or as a U.S. Forest Service smoke jumper or in some sort of other context. I have loved my job so much. My kids even remark like, Dad, you're so happy at your job. You love your job. And I think a lot of that comes from, I also had to have some self-realization. I was never good enough to be a professional athlete. So, but that continued use of the body, that physicality, that problem solving, that teamwork, that physically manifests with firefighting sort of leads me to that statement. Maybe it's not, I'm also Italian, so I'm prone to hyperbole, but maybe it's not 19 out of 20 lives, but maybe 8 out of 10 times I'm choosing firefighting. And I wish that I could be, talented enough to have been like, Dave Grohl in one life and then maybe Steph Curry in another life, but otherwise, the other 8 lives I would do in the fire department because it's just been that much of a fulfilling career. I've loved every facet of it. There are certainly days and there's certainly calls in the middle of the night where you're like, that's where the existential crisis comes in. Why am I here? Why am I sticking to the floor right now? Why am I, dealing with this person that's covered in what God knows what? But for the most part, it's been a career of service, and I've really enjoyed that. And then the teamwork, the team aspect that goes along with it, it's just very infectious and very intoxicating for me.
Yeah, I would imagine. I had a very close friend actually going on his bachelor party trip in like a couple weeks, and he was in the recruiting world like myself. And he survived for like 5 years. He's like, I can't do this. And he's now a firefighter up in Northern California. And just loving it. And my younger brother is about to look into it. He was a college athlete. Now he's moving furniture and caddying at Pebble Beach. And he's like, okay, I'm looking to firefighting. I'm a risk taker in everything else I do, but in the career world, I guess starting my own business a year ago is somewhat of a risk, but it's not the adrenaline.
Very much so.
It's not the adrenaline you get from saving lives and going on calls. Obviously, a lot of it is picking people up, but you're also fighting fires.
Yeah. No, it's great. That aspect of it. And you got to do those 10 sort of service/medical calls for every one good, well, I shouldn't say good. A lot of civilians don't get the good part, but for every challenging fire, every complex emergency that we get, we're doing 10, 20, service calls, whether that's knee pain at 3 a.m. or My CO detector is going off and I think my house is full of CO or whatever it is. There are the mundane calls that you have to sort through, and that doesn't matter where you are, whether you're in LAFD or FDNY or where I serve, which is Contra Costa County Fire. We have a certain amount of mundane calls that we all sort through on the career to get to the very complex, very challenging ones.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's sounds like I listened to the Salty podcast. Have you heard of it?
Getting salty. Those guys, I've met them. They're great.
They're funny.
I'm
Yeah,
not
that's good.
worthy, I'm not worthy to be on that podcast. No, they are
I'm sure
fantastic.
they'd have you on.
They are great guys and they've got great stories. I will say this. I mean, we're talking a little bit about the crossover of technology and firefighting, which is basically a 200-year-old profession here in the United States. And our patron saint is St. Florian, that goes all the way back to the Roman centurions. The use and the utilization of technology is really important. And what I get reminded of by the FDNY, the Boston guys, even the San Francisco guys, is there are times where brute force and just putting your head down and getting the job done is the thing that needs to happen in this moment. And there are ancillary things that can happen around you, but you need brute force, you need determination, you need a backup plan, you need all these things that happen at the human level, that never quit attitude. And those getting salty guys really remind me to try to, imitate that as much as I can when I'm on the job, way back as a firefighter and now as a battalion chief, just sort of setting that bar for my guys and trying to do that every day and trying to remember that every day, that it is at the end of the day a very manual labor, blue collar profession at the task level, and that those are our most important assets. The people performing the task are the ones that are risking their lives the most. I pride myself on having worked at the busiest stations that I possibly could in my context that don't even come close to some of the busy stations in LA or Sacramento or New York or Florida. You can pick any agency, Miami, wherever. But I tried to be as busy as I could at the task level to get as many reps to build that sort of credibility. And with that, when you choose that, and this is probably crossing over into the business world and the entrepreneurial world, with that comes failure. I have not been successful at every fire or every call that I've been on. There have been calls where I've been an absolute failure. And it takes a lot to admit that and say well, this is how we can get better. Every agency, every organization has those instances, probably on the monthly, where it's we weren't at our best, or we got caught flat-footed, or we didn't even know what we were getting into. And it didn't result in a successful outcome. But if you can digest failure correctly, it's really a stepping stone to the next successful venture. And that is, you talk about, it's not as risky. It is risky what you're doing. By starting businesses, your stomach's tied in knots, your livelihood, your children, that's all tied up in that. So in a lot of ways, we share those same anxieties. And so that's kind of how I summarize that.
Yeah, 100%. With Tablet Command, the idea obviously came up almost 2 decades ago. Software and hardware has improved quite a bit since then as well. So excited to kind of talk about how you guys have advanced. How did it start? What were you guys just jawing it up in the firehouse, and how did you come to the point where you're like, okay, let's take the jump?
Yeah, great question. So I had been in the fire service since 1998. I started with CAL FIRE down there in the Monterey County area.
And then, where I'm from.
Yeah, same.
Talked about that, yeah.
And then, we have that connection. And then in 99, my wife and I moved up to the Pacific Northwest. And I started with a fire department called the Kent Fire Department, which is now Puget Sound Fire. It's a very large sort of regional organization. And I slid down to the city of Tacoma. And the reason I did is because at the time, given the cost of living in California, my wife and I thought, I think we're here. I don't foresee reentry into California just as a family. So I really loved wildland fire with CAL FIRE. I loved it. And I kind of, with how wet Western Washington was, it was I'm going to try and be very immersed in this urban setting. And Tacoma was very much that. I think even, 6 weeks into probation, not even, I think, actually, I take that back. a month into probation, I had a very major fire as a probationary firefighter on the ladder at a place called the Alpine Cold Storage. And about a year or two prior to that, 7 guys for the Worcester Fire Department had died in a very similar building. I thought we were going to go in, and by the time we got there, it was like, we're going to pull everybody out and do exterior operations. So I ended up doing exterior operations, but I sort of caught the structural bug, if you will, and I really kind of cut my teeth in Tacoma as a structural firefighter in the urban setting. Went to a lot of fires with the different engine companies that I was assigned to, which was great because that's what I wanted to do. I, again, wanted to be credible in that context. And then I slid down to Contra Costa County when an opening happened for my family and I to move back to California. And I had really longed for that wildland fire setting, and I wanted to work for a county fire department, whether it was LA County, Ventura County, Contra Costa County, it didn't matter because they were going to do everything. They were going to do house fires and wildland fires, car wrecks and high angle rescue, marine firefighting, and all of the above. And so that diversity of call volume was really attractive to me. So I took the leap. And right when I was in the academy because in the fire service, there was never really a lateral transfer for firefighters. There is now because we're hurting for staffing. But back then, if you wanted to change fire departments, you start all the way from the bottom. And I was willing to take that plunge. But while I was a recruit in the academy, 2 of our firefighters died. And they died in the line of duty in a very bread and butter house fire that I had been to several times with Tacoma and even Kent. And that was a real gut punch for me as a person. It was like I had counted on all these things to sort of happen in sequence. Step A, charge the line. Step B, make entry. Step C, go gangbusters with water on the fire and start knocking that thing down. And it's all going to go okay. And for these guys, it did not go okay. They made entry into a 900 square foot house to save an elderly couple. They had thought that they had knocked down the fire, the way the building was constructed. And again, it was a little 900 square foot house. It held a lot of heat, and eventually they both suffered what we call a thermal insult in a flashover, and they died. And they died, if you draw a line from the front door to where they died, maybe it's 25 or 30 feet. And that's just tragic. And so when the Fire Service USA has a line of duty death like that, where it happens in a residential or a commercial fire, it happens in the context of an emergency, we do the equivalent of what the aviation industry does when they investigate a plane crash. The NTSB comes in, they pick it apart. Well, the same is true with fire service. The NIOSH, National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, and OSHA come on in and they pick it apart. And, to kind of spoil alert, they're usually like agency that had this, you did the following things wrong, and we have the following sets of recommendations. And that's true for any fire department that has this. It's a dangerous job, but they're still going to find fault in what we're doing. And so some of the things that they found fault in were actually legit. And that was in our style and standard of communication, our style and standard of incident command systems, our style and standard of accountability. And so NIOSH has these 5 causal factors when line of duty deaths occur. Usually one of them is in play or several are in play. It's lack of communication, lack of hazard assessment or situational awareness, lack of an incident command structure, lack of policies and procedures, or failure to deploy those policies and procedures. And we just got dinged up and down on that. And so about a year later, I got pulled aside by a battalion chief that had the report in hand. And he was like, look, you worked up in the Northwest, right? And I was like, yeah. He goes, what did you guys do for personnel accountability? I said, well, we had this really neat analog system that had Velcro tags with our names on them, and we would move them from one side of a plexiglass board to the other side as you were moving from staging to some sort of task on the fire ground. And a lot of agencies deployed that. And so he's like, well, look, we're arguing at the county level. Would you be willing to give a presentation to some battalion chiefs? I was like, sure. And I went home and I kind of pulled out my curriculum, and I was working at one of our busier stations. So I had been up all night the night before. So I was super loopy. And once I pulled those papers out and sort of set them on the counter, I went and laid down in the afternoon, and I had my brand new iPhone, my phone 2. And I was just like, I need to take a mental break. So I turned on a word game called Words with Friends. Words with Friends is a Scrabble game for your listeners that don't know what that is. And it auto-populates tiles of letters across the bottom, and you drag them onto the Scrabble board to spell words. And you play that reflexively with somebody from another part of the country or the world. And so I had this like epiphany or aha moment of like, oh my God, we've been dragging these Velcro tags and nobody sees that. Only people at the command post see that. But what if we could drag like 3 tiles to a particular portion of a building or a particular portion of a wildland fire, and everybody across the agency or across the call can see it? And so I started transcribing, all these different concepts and notes, and like making these literally colored pencil drawings with straight edges. And I knew, because I taught science for 4 years prior to becoming a firefighter. I left college, I got into teaching, and that's partially why I got into firefighting in the first place. It was a total other podcast. But I knew that like the drag and tap thing was coming because smart boards were out there. And so moving one thing across a pane of glass for all to see was a thing. And I knew if anybody could solve that on a micro basis, it was going to be Apple. And Apple had already started advertising this concept of the iPad. So I kind of leap of faith-ish knew that was coming. And I kind of noodled on the idea for a while. And then I kind of, took a step back, go, okay, well, I'm at my limitation here. Like, I'm creative until the day is long in terms of like conceptually what this should look like, but I don't know how to get my drawings onto an iPad and make it a thing. And so I asked around a little bit with IT folks, and a guy that I was working with at Contra Costa County Fire, a fellow firefighter, his name is Will Pigeon, and he's currently our CEO and also a co-founder. We decided to co-found a company around this concept. And then it was like, okay, now you're going to enter graduate school, the graduate school of hard knocks, and you're going to figure out what you do to make a company. It's like saying, all right, you're going to cook for this Michelin star restaurant and you get to shop at 7-Eleven. It was very eye-opening. And so we raised a bunch of money. I take that back. We raised very little money. To us, it was a bunch of money, but in the end, it was just a few $100,000 to launch this MVP. And in the 2010 unicorn era, when like Twitter and LinkedIn and everybody's raising billions of dollars, we were like, hey dudes, can we have 100,000 to get this life-saving thing off the ground? And I'll pause there because I know I've kind of gone on this stream of consciousness of how this came to be, but that's how it came to be.
That was it. Yeah, that's brilliant. It seems kind of interested in knowing the start of the process there. So I'm glad you paused. Obviously, like you said, it's a life-saving technology. You're going to make firefighters better. Everyone wants that. What's the business like in the firefighting world? Are people constantly approaching you with business ideas? Are they trying to sell to you? Are fire chiefs getting called all the time by entrepreneurs? Or is it a pretty small world in terms of people selling things to you?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's a really good question. If you go to any standard fire show, there are a fair amount of entrepreneurs that are firefighters. So they are coming up with the better burning light bulb, or the better axe, the better siren, things that are physical and tangible, the better rescue device, the better rescue rope, the better, fill in the blank. Then there are some software people now that are former firefighters or current firefighters that are coming up with those as well. There is a business around firefighting, and there are some tastemakers and consolidators with regard to distributors for things like PPE, personal protective equipment, helmets, goggles, gloves. They're now starting to get into the distribution of software, but it is kind of open green space. The issue with firefighters is we see shiny things all the time. We see squirrels, we see shiny things, so we're off to the next thing. And so stickiness can be a deterrent. I have firefighters that come to us, hey, I got a really good idea. And I'm like, okay, it's going to involve A, B, C, and D. And they're like, no, I want you to do it. And I'm like, I'm busy. Bandwidth is full. This is what you need to do. And then 9 times out of 10, and that's probably true in just the startup world, people lose interest, they lose money, or they vet the idea and it just doesn't have legs. And that's very similar in the fire service. The one thing that we really subjected ourselves to is we decided to step into the world of mission critical incident command platforms. And so it had to be right, and it had to be right all the time. It couldn't be like, sorry guys, we're down 25% of the time. Hope you don't kill anybody. So it had to be that sort of always on accurate thing. And about a year into the process, when the industry was getting really excited about it, I kind of hit a timeout. I was like, hey, Will, I feel like we need to really put this on the chopping block and take it to some tastemakers, like fire chiefs that are on the circuit of speaking, and they've been around the block a few times, and they've been the incident commander of these really big, complex incidents, to get maybe their blessing, their endorsement, and then also poke holes in it to make sure we're not wasting our time or money and wasting any more of our investors' money. Because at that point, we were sort of in the position that because we had raised such a minimal amount of money, that we could have probably paid them back with a lot of overtime and maybe a side job at Starbucks. But we got validation from some of the hardest critics. In fact, someone that was on that Getting Salty podcast, a gentleman from retired division chief, actually retired deputy chief from San Francisco, and very hard-scrabbled person that was going to shoot us as straight as an arrow. And he basically said that we had nailed it, but that we were going to have a really hard time navigating the politics of these larger, older cities. But from that, we've actually springboarded into some success with those larger, older cities. And so I'm glad we got that validation and that scrutiny early on. I would say that helped us. We were a pretty authentic project and product to begin with, but I would say that even tightened up our authenticity and our commitment to uptime even more. And I got to give credit to Will and his development team and all the people that participate in that. John Wickenhauser, Jake Pelk to a certain extent, even though he's on the sales side, Mario Susach, who have really made sure that our uptime is locked tight, because in the end, now, 15 years later, Tablet Command is kind of a dependency for most of our customers. And that is gravity that we do not take very lightly, no pun intended.
How many people are working full time on Tablet Command?
So now I think we are up to almost 30, if not 30 FTEs. And then there's a smattering of us, like myself. I'm a co-founder, but I decided to stay in the fire service. So I work part-time on Tablet Command. I'm doing a lot of the front-facing podcasts. I talk to a lot of customers. I gather a lot of testimonial information. I do a lot of writing. I do a lot of the sales, to support the sales side, but I don't take commission. I just kind of talk about it as my daily go-to as a fire chief, as a battalion chief, and then hand it over to sales and another product specialist who usually is a colleague in the fire service. But yeah, we're at about 25, 30 full-time employees, and then another 5 to 10 of us are part-time and still working in the fire service. We really are committed to that credibility and that need to talk the talk with the people that we're selling this product to.
Have you talked to other builders in the police force or other products just like yours, but for a different domain?
So we're actually that product in a different domain. The incident command structure is applicable to multiple domains. For example, let's call it a major hurricane in Florida. There are sheriff's departments there that are interoperating with fire departments, both of which are on Tablet Command and able to have visibility into each other's platforms in terms of resource allocation for different parts of that emergency. So over a large-scale disaster, you've got, in some cases, utility, PD, and fire. And that is absolutely the case in California. And that is starting to become the case around the country, where different organizations like oil companies and utilities and law enforcement are saying, why would we reinvent the wheel? These guys, we defer to them anyway. So on a hazardous materials incident, generally across the country, I'm speaking from the Pacific to the Atlantic, law enforcement will defer to fire to set up the incident command structure anyway. We'll exist in unified command. We don't boss around the cops, but they are under the same umbrella in the command post. So we just use this common platform. And this platform has so many other assets under one pane of glass, like live drone footage or information on chemical reactions. And you can just access it on our platform.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it makes complete sense. I would imagine FEMA has hopefully something similar or is interested in your product.
There is interest at the task level. So there was a building collapse in Florida a while back, the Surfside condos. I don't know if you remember that. I think it was like a 12-story building that just pancaked. And the FEMA task forces used Tablet Command as a standalone to organize their resources. We have 7, we may have 10. I'm getting it wrong, but my partners at Tablet Command will correct me. I believe we have between 7 and 10 FEMA task forces in California, and 90% of those participants come from fire departments that already have Tablet Command. So it's getting a lot of federal exposure, but we're not a formal partner with FEMA just yet. But I have confidence that that's going to come sometime soon.
I mean, whether or not it's your tool, it seems like every incident response team should be using something like this. It just seems like it would be gross negligence not to at this point with where the technology's at. Do you find that most people or leads that are not using your product are using something similar, or are they still using Velcro?
Yeah, so it's Heinz 57. It's across the board. What you're sort of alluding to are common operating pictures. And the more analog you get, and are reliant on radio reports as sort of your common operating communications platform, the further in the dark you are. And so that sandbox is really important for everybody to have visibility into. There are some web-based systems that take a little bit longer to set up. They're sort of geared for, okay, natural disaster, go. But they're not versatile for a single residence structure fire that suddenly on a very windy day catches the entire neighborhood on fire and then scales up. And that's the beauty of Tablet Command, is you can use it on the smallest incident, track everybody accurately, suddenly go from 10 resources to 100 resources and still maintain accountability. I would say that a lot of those competitive products out there that are web-based or keyboard-based, they have a hard time scaling down. And a lot of times their use is impractical because those smaller scale, very dangerous incidents like what we referenced earlier, that 900 square foot house that has the potential to kill 2 firefighters, that's all over with in 15 minutes. And the web-based, keyboard-based stuff, just from a field operator of 27 years, it doesn't work very well. It's not very dexterous to pull out a laptop and be like, oh, let me keyboard you guys onto the scene. Mobile software is where it's at with regard to that.
So how would that 900 square foot house incident be different with Tablet Command? Is there a different result there?
Very great question. I'm not going to go so far as to say there's a different result, because they got the alarm late at the dispatch level, and they did everything they could to save that elderly couple. With regard to accountability, though, it would have been 100% different, because the incident commander would have then known and had it on a pane of glass who was responding to that call. It got pieced together. And again, that was at the dispatch level because of how the private alarm company informed our dispatch center. There was like a chain of events of misinformation that led to these guys rolling in as a single resource, suddenly realizing they had a double rescue on their hands and a significant delay of other resources. It's hard to say if that would have resulted in a non-line of duty death. I'm not saying it's impossible because of the information that was provided, but certainly who was coming to the call would have been much more accurate, and sorting them out and organizing them and tracking all those activities would have been much more accurate versus sort of the foggy chaos that it was. Again, out of respect for their memories, I don't want to use a product to be like, if they had only used it, they'd be alive today. I think that would be crass and an overreach, but there certainly would have been a lot more visibility early, and there may have been some nonverbal communication that might have clued them in to a little bit more of a dangerous situation. But it's very hard to say that it would have resulted in a completely different outcome.
Sure. There's so much that goes into that type of situation. Maybe I could have framed the question a little better.
That's okay. No, because I will say this, and I can say this verbatim. Two different folks. One is an executive at the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation in Maryland, just an incredible organization and a partner of ours. We dedicate 1% of our revenues toward basically their widows and orphans fund to support families of fallen firefighters. And then the fire chief of one of the Sacramento regional fire departments, they have both, independent of one another, they didn't collaborate on this, but independent of one another, they both said tablet command is saving lives that you don't even know about. And I definitely take that to heart, and I know Will takes that to heart as well, to the point that he gets very emotional talking about it, and it is an emotional thing. We do know of lives saved because of tablet command. We had an incident on a very large fire in California where basically a battalion chief saw his companies on tablet command and said, if you turn left, and I'm paraphrasing, so, for the fact checkers out there, if you turn left, you're dead. If you turn right, you have a chance to live. And it's a great documentary that's on our YouTube channel called One Day in July. And it's these 4 firefighters' account of their harrowing escape from what we call a blow up on a big wildland fire. And there are a lot of anecdotal stories about that. We're working on ways to quantify, like, oh my God, here's another life saved by tablet command. But to get that feedback from an empirical level, from sort of an implicit feeling that these chiefs have that we're saving lives that we don't know about, is very validating that the work that we're doing is really important. And it's an honor to be working.
100%. Yeah. I wonder, you think there's any data points that you could gather from the product usage where you could come to conclusions like that? Or is it mostly going to be a qualitative, just talking with the users and getting their gut feeling?
It's all of it. We are committed to data and analyzing that data. We do have a lot of back-end data that we're taking some serious looks at from different perspectives with regard to usage of different checklists or, and sort of the concept of checklists. There's a great book called The Checklist Manifesto, and it's all about the usage of checklists under situations of duress, whether it's a plane going down or in the middle of brain surgery, or during firefighting. And he references, I think, all 3 of those in his book. I'm going to butcher the name, so apologies, but it's Atwal Gawande, I believe, is the author, but it's called The Checklist Manifesto. I highly recommend it for anybody in the corporate world. It's a great systems book. And so those are things that we look at in terms of what checklists are you using? We can, after action on the data level, any call, and see how our customers are deploying different features, and then, cross-reference that with empirical data. And I'm sure I know we're getting better and better with that.
With the company building aspect, did Will kind of develop everything himself initially, or did you guys immediately build an engineering team and he's just kind of advising? Because I saw he actually has a technical background.
He does have a technical background. He got into CS in college, but we both knew that this software was going to require, and this is firefighters terms, a lot more bells and whistles and a lot more fancy architecture. And so we were lucky through one of our first investors, which was a friend of mine. He turned us on to an advisor that had done this a few times and was on the software building track. And so they turned us on immediately to a software development group that was partially based at the time in Northern Ireland around Belfast, or, oh my God, where's the fancy crystal made? And then partially in Romania and partially in San Jose. And so we had weekly meetings with them about the UI and what the first MVP needed to look like and what sort of core competencies it needed to achieve. And I highly recommend that for anyone, unless you are the next Zuckerberg or you're an Elon Musk person. If you've got a great idea, but you are more of a practical hands-on person and you're not a ones and zeros person, there are people out there that'll help you interpret that. Now, especially with AI now, it can go a lot faster. I can only imagine what this would have looked like with an AI co-pilot on all of this. And now we're starting to deploy those, but geez Louise, a decade and a half ago that would have made this go a lot faster.
Yeah, they could probably build a computer science grad with 2 years of experience could probably build what you've built pretty quickly in a week or two. Like that's just so
Absolutely.
crazy. It might not be as reliable though. The seniority definitely helps when making something reliable. In terms of AI, I'm glad you brought that up. Where do you see that helping? And not just definitely with your product, but also just in the firefighting service in general. I think AI is probably going to impact just about every job. I'm kind of curious in your perspective how it impacts firefighting as well.
Yeah, there's a few ways. First off, we are starting to look at ways to deploy that for suggesting next moves. The way that AI can make gajillions of calculations in terms of this fire is here in 20 minutes, it's going to be here, and you need the following resources based on these risk levels. And the fact that that can calculate that almost like a video game, sort of with this like Star Wars-esque imagination of you need 20 engines in this location right now. I think AI is going to play a big role in that. And I think there are companies that are working on that. And we're certainly happy to aggregate that data in terms of our back end, in terms of crunching analytics and things like that. And then also just in the hardware and at the tip of the spear, you deploying AI to reconstruct a room that is completely obscured by smoke, to where you're having to crawl on your belly but still know where you're going, and giving you a sense of breadcrumbs on your way out. Because a lot of firefighters that die in the line of duty died because they get lost or disoriented and then they run out of air. And so having that sort of co-pilot as we go along is going to be important. Look, I've been into plenty of burning buildings and grabbed on a hold to a civilian and helped yank them out of the building under fire conditions. Are we going to send in robots someday to do that? And we'll sort of be like shepherds of robots. I think, not in my career, but there may be a time where RoboCop or Robo Firefighter guy goes in and is able to locate grandma and, gently pick up grandma and walk her out of there in the least thermally insulted, thermally compromised pathway back to fresh air. Maybe it's
like a stretch.
Yeah, it does. Right now, my firefighter brothers will kill me for saying that. And it does seem like a stretch, but there are some ways that robotics, certainly in the wildland context, can start to help us achieve our robotics, and analytics can help us achieve our objectives on an incident within the next couple years. I think you'll start to see that.
Yeah, drone swarms. I could imagine you could have a firefighting drone swarm that could do some serious damage on hard to reach or impossible to reach areas. Definitely could see that. I think the robot picking up grandma might be more of a personal assistant robot in the house that cooks and cleans and then can put out really small fires before it becomes a big fire. So maybe not but you have to buy the upgraded model to also get a pickup.
Yeah, 100%, or turn that window and a door right now so we can, hand grandma to a ladder company that's waiting for her. So we'll see. One of the reasons I got into the fire service is because of leather helmets and what it's meant to American history. It's been, really exciting to be a part of American history. I'm sort of a nerdy fire historian, mature historian, and I love being a part of it. Like I said, if I had, 8 more lives, I'd probably commit it to, working for, older, more traditional fire departments. But I'm really enjoying what I'm doing with the department that I'm in now because, the call volume and the diversity of calls that we go to is phenomenal.
My wife's not going to be happy to hear about this podcast.
Well, on the side, we can talk about ways to get you into the fire service. You're still young enough. You look athletic. It's totally possible for you.
Training for an Ironman right now.
There you go. That's amazing. Yeah. Half our guys can't say that.
Shoot, I can't talk anymore about it. For company building and running a fire department, how has the fire department helped you company build, and what do you hate about company building, and what do you quite like about it?
I would say that with firefighting, you get tangible feedback immediately. Did the fire go well or did it not go well? And then you can have pointed conversations with the people involved. With company building, sometimes it's a little bit of a softer approach. There's a little bit more nuance. Some people get it, and some people think they get it, and some people do not get it. And so understanding a human being and being a bit of a psychologist and understanding what motivates them, there are similarities there between the fire service and company building, but there are, some folks that think that they can take this fire department patriarchal, hierarchical approach and apply it to company building and achieve something, and that's impossible. We experimented with that, and that went horribly wrong. Good for us to pivot away from that. With regard to some of the budgetary things, dotting I's and crossing T's, using systems, there's a lot of similarities. The one thing that I think we could do a little better job, what I love about the fire department is you have to make a split decision. You got to take the best of your training, the best of your recognition, prime decision making, as we say, that slide tray in your brain, and make a decision, right or wrong. It's almost like I'm not comparing us to the Navy, but it's like being a Navy sea captain. They are right even when they're wrong because they made a decision. I love the whole concept of like a Kobayashi Maru, which for people who are under the age of 50 are not gonna know what the hell I'm talking about. But the Kobayashi Maru was a simulator in the Star Trek episodes that was unwinnable, except James Kirk, Captain Kirk, the captain of the ship, he was the one person who beat the Kobayashi Maru. But even the Naval Academy uses failure as a way for their officers to continue to make decisions even as the ship is sinking. And in the fire service, that forces you to do that. What is hard for me sometimes, and I have to keep my mouth shut, which I've done a poor job of, is sometimes you'll get analysis paralysis on the corporate side of things. And it's like, make a decision, right or wrong, let's live with the consequences, but let's just not sit here and we could, we should. So there are times where I have to sort of talk to my wife, have a whiskey, take a pause, sleep on it before I'm reactionary with regard to there are moments of indecision where you can't necessarily tolerate that in the fire service that happens in company building. Certainly the administrative parts, there's a lot of similarities. I pride myself on not being a very good administrator, and I'm thankful, truly grateful for those folks that do take that seriously, because for all the listeners out there that are looking to be company builders, you need that. So if you are the yin and you're a sort of a pants on fire idea person and you're one idea a minute and you're kind of, very creative and charismatic, you need that yang that is going to settle you down and dot those I's and cross those T's. And so you need both in a company.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a crucial part of company building, is to not try to be good at everything. Find what you're good at, do that, and find someone else that's good at what you're not good at. There's
Absolutely.
No sense in, doing a poor job of something just because you want to do it all, or
yeah. I think that's driven by ego and hubris too. Like, I'll do it. I'll get it. And I'm certainly guilty of that. There's two things I'm guilty of. It's that mixed with, and this is something that happens on the fire ground too. As a supervisor, you start panning further and further back from the nitty gritty, dirty task work. So, even as a captain, I wanted to roll hose. Like, that's a dirty job. Stacking hose on your shoulder, rolling it, putting it back on the rig. You get pushed out of the way quickly by engineers and firefighters because that's their job, but you don't want to ask anyone to do a job that you're not willing to do, like the total
100%.
Just grunt work. So in a way that sort of leaks into company building, but it's an inappropriate message. And then you end up overtaxing your bandwidth and not getting anything done. I've been guilty of that, so, those are just all things to sort of keep track of as you are company building, that you, like you said, you eloquently stated, you're good at certain things, not good at certain things. And it's really important to learn to delegate. I think I lost you.
There we are.
Come back to me. You were talking.
Yeah. So slight transition, if you're open to it. The political game in firefighting, there's obviously politics and business as well. Has that been a problem in your career, managing politics, and then not just politics, but like the civil side of how does the government treat firefighting? Do you feel like you get a positive treatment from most municipalities, and is that a positive experience?
Yeah, I think for the most part, the one great aspect of being a firefighter in the United States is we're union. So, we have a union and a unified voice in terms of wages and working conditions. We have fairly sophisticated negotiating teams, that are pretty diligent about getting comps from other area departments about standard of living and things like that. And what the unionization forces you to do is sort of have everything above board and standard with regard to negotiating contracts, having policies and procedures in place, and having total visibility with that. On the corporate side of things, that's not always the case. It's sort of like, if you don't like it, don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out. And so there can be, you kind of have to learn how to be a very good negotiator, whether you're selling an idea within your own company or you're selling the board on a pivot or selling an investor on why they should put money into the company. So that is some of the political inside baseball. And then there's the outside baseball, which is, the perception that the public has of firefighters, the perception that the agency has of a firefighter starting a business and selling to that agency, and all the paperwork that goes into that, where you're having to very either clearly demonstrate a separation from that process or completely remove yourself from the process and recuse yourself from that. And that's kind of a minefield that's really, I'm grateful for the above board procedures and all the different, legal paperwork that has to happen to sort of show people like, hey, I'm not profiting from, any backroom deal here, sending in a totally different team. Don't even come to me for support questions. But that can be really hard sometimes. In my own agency, hey, you're the co-founder. Can you fix this or that? I'm like, send in the support ticket. Send in a support ticket. I can't talk to you about that. Or, I can help you with operational parts, but I can't help you with contract parts. Talk to somebody else. And that's hard because like, what? You're the guy, you're the co-founder of this lemonade stand. Just, and it's that part can be a little bit tricky.
How do we get you on Getting Salty?
I don't know. They'd have to invite me. And if they did, that would be a huge honor. But, like I said, those guys are just real. I mean, I think a good firefighter recognizes there's always someone a lot better. And when I look at those guys, I go, wow, they have had these prolific careers. I'm not worthy to be a part of that conversation, but who knows, that I would gladly and very humbly accept that invitation, but that's, I don't see them, dying to invite me anytime soon. I don't know. We'll see. I'd love to.
The podcast invite. You don't have to die.
Yeah. That's true.
You're building a really cool tool that's helping departments all around the country. So it seems like I'm going to do my part. I'm going to see if I can play a part in it, and don't hold your breath. It's
I appreciate that. I mean, one thing I think that would resonate with those guys is we've done our very best to replicate what their guys were doing in analog anyway. So if their battalion chiefs were using a dry erase marker and a whiteboard and drawing in a specific way or using Velcro tags, this interface is going to look really similar. These guys may not care because even as officers, as fire officers, you're still a player coach. So you're in there with your hands on the body, dragging them out. And then you're pointing and then doing more manual tasks. And I lived that for, 11, 12-ish years as a fire captain. So I understand they want to talk more about tip of the spear stuff. And I love talking about that. I just don't have the Star Spangled Banner stories I think that these guys have in the FDNY, and that, fourth box in Brooklyn that they went to, or the top was blowing off and all that. I'm like, so I have some California stories to share, and that's I think interesting to them, but like I said, I would be, with the utmost humility, I would accept that invitation and recognize that I'm talking to some real rock stars.
I think when most of the country thinks of fires, they think of California. They think of the FDNY when they think of departments.
Yeah.
But when they think of fires, they probably think of California.
Yeah. I mean, we seem to be always on fire.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even in January, it's really interesting. What's cool about California is you will get some very salty San Francisco guys and Oakland guys and LA City guys and be right on the same fire lines with them in like Napa or Tahoe or the Chino Hills. We all work together in this big matrix. And now the FDNY is starting to come along with that. And which is really cool. I mean, I am a huge fan of interoperability, and it's just, like I said, I'm sort of intoxicated by the whole industry. And the more that we do crossover and cross training and, even conferences and stuff, it's just amazing to meet these folks from different parts of the country and collaborate on some of these different issues.
Where does this salty descriptor come from?
I think it comes from an old salty sea captain and when someone's like super salty, they've been there and they've done that, but like for real, like they have seen all of it. And again, I think it kind of points back to that salty sea captain that then sort of translates into that super salty firehouse guy. There's certainly no salt involved in fighting fires. It's more like soot. It should be more like getting sooty. But it's I think it does point back to that gritty, gravelly, tough, leather-faced dude that like crawls deep under the smoke.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, anything else you wanted to share? Anything else worth mentioning? And how does someone reach you?
Yeah, you can find us at tabletcommand.com, and we're in all the social media channels. So LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, I think we're even in Blue Sky now. YouTube, we have a great YouTube channel that has some fantastic testimonials from a lot of our different customers from around the country, which I'm very proud of, that we're not just a California company, that we cater to fire departments all over the United States. We're about 1,500 users now. And when I say users, I don't mean people, I mean fire departments around the United States and Canada, and growing. And so you can find us at tabletcommand.com, or you can ask us questions at info@tabletcommand.com. And then I have a LinkedIn profile, so you can find me at Andy Bozzo or Andrew Bozzo, connected to Tablet Command. You can also get to me through our website. And I'm certainly always down to advise young entrepreneurs about what it's like to start a business from some sort of domain expertise. If you had told me 15 years ago, you're going to start a business, and not only is it going to be a business, it's going to be a software as a service company. So good on you for being a SaaS co-founder. Being like, you are high. I'm not doing anything of the sort. I'm trying to become a captain in the fire service, and that's going to be my career. But this thing had to happen. We had to do a better job of tracking our people in emergencies. And so the business just sort of fell in around that mission. And that's how this story came to be. And I know that that can apply to a lot of different industries. So I'm always happy to advise and talk to people. And I don't want anything for it. I'm just, happy to advise you from my mistakes and failures, and hope that you avoid some of the same pitfalls.
That's awesome. Yeah, I hope people take you up on that. Well, thank you so much for coming on Peaking. I certainly had a wonderful time talking to you. Very interested in seeing you guys grow and doing whatever I can. The episode should be out in a week or two, so keep an eye on that, and then you can repost. But thanks for coming on.
Wyatt, it was an absolute pleasure. You are really easy to talk to, and thank you very much. I'll talk to you soon.